Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pop Open That Case. No, not with a needle. So glad that you are here watching this Zoom session tonight, that you're here with us, or that you're watching it at home after the fact. I'm just so glad, that you're here with us. My name is Dr. Erin Zaffini. I am the Director of Teacher Education at Longy School of Music, and I oversee everything when it comes to our music education offering. So our online Master of Music and Music Education, our online Certificate of Advanced Graduate Studies for those of you who might already have a master's, our Summer at Longy workshops and professional development, our a la carte courses, all things music ed. I oversee everything music ed at Longy. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Benjamin Nourse Gross, one of my esteemed colleagues, who is an absolute expert in working with students whose first language is not English. He's really smart. He has wonderful pointers for you. I am sure you will gain a lot out of this workshop. If you have any questions about any of this after the fact, feel free to reach out to me directly. I can also forward your information to Benjamin himself, and he can get back to you as well. And without further ado, Benjamin, you're up.
Thanks so much, Erin. Appreciate the introduction. Thanks for having me, and thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. I'm just going to share my screen so we can start this PowerPoint and talk a little bit about how we can make our own language accessible. So why I'm here is I'm a language learner. I always took elective classes in languages, foreign languages, and then transitioned into the ESL classroom. So for me, really accessibility in language is a little bit different and a little bit different than our expectations as native speakers. So we're going to look at that. While the title might be a little ridiculous, this is kind of the thread of what we're going to talk about and kind of try to illuminate and then see what we can do about it. So anyways, the first thing I have is a language poll. This first is basically the same three statements, but this first statement is, we're coming up on our final class, so please pop up to my office if you have anything to make up or simply haven't turned in, right? Same sentence, but different approach. We're approaching our final class, so please visit my office if you forgot to do any assignments. And the third sentence, which I'd like you to think about, which is clearest for you, or just how these are differently clear, is we're on the final lap of our semester, so please circle back if you would like a helping hand getting all your ducks in a row, right? We might be able to understand these, but what's the accessibility? What is the access point here? Well, I'm going to ask you to hold your answers, actually, because we're going to revisit this after the presentation to see if anything's been illuminated or if your inclinations have been confirmed. So anyways, language for me in the bottom right-hand corner attempts to project an image from the speaker's brain to the listener's imagination, right? And so I provide this train of thought just to kind of think about what language can turn into in the speaker's head if English is not their first language. Now, dog and duck might not seem very similar in our heads, but actually dog and duck are extremely similar in terms of pronunciation and how we hear them. So the word duck can very easily be misconstrued for dogs, especially in our photo on the left, a day for ducks. We know what this means because we have some sort of idiomatic context as native speakers. But if you don't, this sentence doesn't really make a lot of sense. And you can see this kid wondering, are dogs lazy in English because it wants to ride the bus? Really misconstrued from our original meaning. So I just like to provide this definition because it might change a little bit of perspective, or it might open a door in terms of what we're doing with language and who's receiving that language. And while we're often talking about students whose first language is not English, this might also apply across boundaries, maybe teaching music for someone who has never really engaged with the language of music. So we have a lot of different types of informal language, right? We have slang, we have idioms, we have lingo, which I would say is just a slang within a certain unit, right? There's business lingo, which is just slang for business. There are media references. I'm also thinking like books. I'm thinking Shakespeare fits into this category, though many of these have been codified as idioms. But the difference is not really that important. It's just that we do have different categories of informal language. and also metaphorical references. For example, on the right, all of these do mean the same thing. They're on fire, the creme de la creme. It's their moment. The cat's meow actually comes from a cartoon from the 1920s, which I think is kind of interesting. Or they're on top of the world. Now, if you were to imagine, or if you do speak a second language, try to translate this and think, if someone said that describing someone, están en fuego, would I understand that? Or would it be completely strange? But what are phrasal verbs? What is the subject of this presentation? Go ahead.
Subject, are you really asking, Benjamin? Okay. So the subject of this presentation is how to, I'm probably butchering this right now, so help me out here, but is how to speak to our students who have English as a second language so that way they can understand it and we're not, I don't know, help me out here. I know what I'm trying to say, but help me out here.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking at a specific type of language that might be difficult. And I've just reviewed a lot of different ones, but phrasal verbs is a type of verbal pattern in English.
Okay.
And so this formula that we can make for this verbal pattern in English is when we have a verb and what we call a particle. Now, this is a little technical, don't worry at all. A particle is another word for preposition because some verbs take prepositions. We use prepositions with verbs, right? Like, I look at you. That's not a phrasal verb. That is a preposition being used with a verb. The real key here is after the equal sign is that there's different usage of this verbal definition or expectation, right? So for example, bring about, right? If I didn't know what bring about meant, I would say, I know bring, and I'm picturing someone carrying something, and I know about. I say about when I talk about things. But putting them together might not be as accessible as we think. And a lot of times when people don't understand a vocabulary word or they don't understand an initial phrase, we'll try to explain things in these terms. We won't access or we won't reach for that really academic word, or maybe a word we think is like, well, that's actually kind of a more advanced vocab word as I learned it as a native speaker. But actually, these things are not quite the same, as students often learn academic language really well. Like I would say, my Spanish is very academic. I would say if you use slang in Spanish, I would go, uh-huh, and I have a degree in Spanish. The last one I want to point out, give out, also does have two different meanings, right? We can picture give out on that photo as you see it on the left of giving out groceries or food or giving out advice. And on the right, our car has given out. There is a technical difference that you can explain grammatically, but that is not this lesson, right? A little bit of extended explanation here, and I'm not saying that all phrasal verbs are hard to understand. So let's think about tune up. Tune up is something you'll say in a classroom with any string instrument. Is this a phrasal verb? I say like, yeah, sure, this can be a phrasal verb, right? Hot dog can be a sandwich, sure. But if you tell someone, oh, I was eating a sandwich, they're going to picture bread and probably not a hot dog with a bun. And in the same way, if you say, something like in the previous slide, give out, they might have like a choice of which image to grab from. Tune up doesn't really provide two different images. Maybe they might think up is strange. Why up? But I get tune, so I'm going to go with it. There's no real difference. There's no definition change, right? Other examples, we bring along. If you bring something, along makes sense, considering the definition of along, considering the definition of bring. Know about, turn up, and write down are all sort of similar. The particle, which is the preposition, doesn't change much. It doesn't change the direction of something. But sometimes the direction can change. And so I just want to consider these similar phrases as these are pretty like common phrases to use in the classroom, whether these are innocuous moments of giving instruction, organizing the classroom, whether these are in answering questions or follow-up, or whether these are explaining what a term means in more detail. Think it over. If we use that phrasal verb as native speakers, we know this is part of our common vocabulary. But that's actually very close to a similar phrase, thinking time is over. And so if thinking time is over and think it over, these are actually opposite directions to give. Check it out and they looked checked out, well, might not be opposite directions or instructions or observations, but they're quite different. And so again, I go back to the image that we project in the listener's head, right? We want that to be as accurate as what we're thinking as speakers, as native speakers. So I have two images on the right, and I would like to ask you, what is in common? What do we have in common here? What are the similar phrases where we have clearly an essay on the left with some markups, and on the right we have someone pointing and also verbalizing?
So what do they have in common?
Yeah, what would be the similar phrase? It's not think it over and thinking time is over, and it's not check it out and they looked checked out, but there's a similar phrase here that unites these.
It's none of the ones that are here.
No, it's not this is our guessing game.
Okay, okay, okay. Oh my goodness. From the top? I mean, she's pointing to the top.
That's really good. That's definitely another phrase that is super confusing. That is really close. It's look it over. From the top is a great description of what she's doing
Oh,
and this. But look it over. If I say look it over, you're going to edit your paper. And she's actually saying look over there. So
oh,
similar
yeah.
phrases, different directions. This is just part of the confusion that happens with phrasal verbs is because the words aren't necessarily directly translatable. Sometimes the meaning is lost, especially if that particle is a wrong direction, and especially if there's a big verb change. Looking more at this confusion and just how this might emanate in someone's head, pick as a verb has a couple different definitions, right? Choose, decide, and grab as two different definitions. They're very similar in my head, but I wanted to separate something that's done in your head and something that's done physically. So choose, decide, or grab could be represented by this first photo, but these photos are often are just to evoke imagery. You might think of this kind of pick. You might think of this verb to pick, which is not on my short definition list, but I'm sure pick goes much further in a verbal definition list. And lastly, maybe not exactly pluck, but similar to pluck, you might ask someone to pick. And so just with the normal verb, we have these three images that can come to mind and many more. But if we look at a phrasal verb, and this is a transitive phrasal verb that's separated by it, meaning I have given an instruction to someone, pick it up, right? This can actually emanate in three different ways. One with like mostly what I would think of first, but also a very physical definition, right? So if something's physical, it's less of a confusing phrasal verb. But if something's more metaphorical, like pick up the pace, and I can imagine someone going, okay, and just picking up the metronome. I'm picking up the pace right now. Physically correct. Direction might be a little different. There's also pick it up to learn, right? Oh, when did you pick that up? That might be a confusing question, actually. The easier question might be, when did you learn that? When did you acquire that knowledge? Might actually be less confusing to someone than when did you pick that up, right? We also, with pick, have to deal with, there's pick on, pick out, pick apart, and pick at, all of which have a physical definition and which also have a very similar, perhaps, metaphorical definition. But pick up on. There are also phrasal verbs that have two particles. Teaching this to international students has been not a great pleasure of anyone's, but it is great when we see that aha moment. But often this part of the lesson receives a lot of sighs and some people
Oh,
leaving. Like, what do you mean? I had mastery over one particle. There's two particles. Like, yes, sometimes in English we list a lot of prepositions. And imagine you pick up on to something. Imagine you could do that. That would be three straight prepositions. So pick up on, again, we have this initial imagery from pick, okay? And then we add the aspect of up, right? And so this is also considering if we hear all the words and we actually distinguish all of the words. And now we think, okay, I know pick up, right? These are all my images for pick and pick up. And now I'm adding on. And so oftentimes this will just kind of lead to confusion and people say, can you just explain this in a different way? And that's really what we get back to is how can we use one verb or a verb with one part when actually phrasal verbs have two, sometimes three parts, and can be confusing because of the prepositions. Prepositions, they might seem innocuous. Might not think of them. We don't really study them a lot, but they actually cause a lot of confusion language to language because they indicate direction, they indicate ownership, and they indicate a lot of intricacies that are really important. So back to our language poll, which is clearest for you? I've read all of these before, so I won't continue. Erin, would you like to say which one is clearest for you?
Well, I mean, for me, number two, it would be number two.
I also like number two a lot. I think number three requires you to know what final lap means. It requires circle back, and it requires helping hand and ducks in a row. So I would say that one we can eliminate pretty immediately since there's idiomatic and colloquial references all within. The last one actually might be something you hear, might be something you reach for to make the last part of class or to make whatever speech or instruction is going on, to make it more accessible. But actually, we've used up in three different ways in this sentence. And using phrasal verbs that many times can often cause confusion. When one can cause confusion, three can also cause confusion. I would say the second one is also clearest when we're speaking with English language learners, maybe even often, or maybe even also native speakers. So what can we do? I'm sure a lot of people do a lot of great things in their classrooms. I've seen amazing things at Longy. I've seen amazing things in my past jobs of people kind of bridging these gaps, even within students in the class. Oftentimes, international students will be at language acquisition in the A1, A2 level, and in really kind of blossoming language in the upper B2 section and in the same class. So oftentimes there are a lot of different access points where some person is learning a phrasal verb, another person is learning what the base verb means. So continue to understand our audiences through lens of access to language, thinking native speaker and non-native speaker. We might have different tendencies and different comfort with different types of language. And that actually academic language is pretty accessible in the English language classroom, despite us thinking maybe their vocabulary is limited. It's limited to academic language, if anything, which is really limitless. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So, I mean, so I actually have for those teachers who are watching this at the moment, one, I think, really great way for teachers to identify what they're doing is something that they're not a big fan of usually. At least I'm not, I never was, but actually video recording you teaching and then picking it apart. I was just gonna say picking it apart, but actually watching yourself back and not watching for how you're managing a classroom or whatever, but really just watching with the intent of finding all the ways that you say things and how many different ways that actually could mean to a student whose language is not English, is not their first language. I think that that's probably the one of the most powerful things. And I know that one time that I did that, not for language, but for something else. And it was amazing the number of instances that I did the offense in one class. And so that's a recommendation that I would have for teachers is if you have a lot of English language learners to video yourself and watch it back and just kind of do a little tally of what are you saying and what could that mean? And then maybe on one side of the table and then on another side of the table, what could you say instead? And kind of wind it back that way.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. That recommendation is absolutely what I would give as well. Really, really thoughtful. And also thinking of always having that synonym ready. So you don't have to change too much in your speech patterns, but you can say a synonym. You can say the sentence again in a different way. And when you reiterate the sentence, you can see understanding in people's eyes. That's just something that teachers pick up. And so that can provide access for people as well. Just repeating it and saying, oh, I used a phrasal verb, and then automatically repeating. It's quite hard at first to find those synonyms, but anyone can do it.
excellent. Thank you so much, Benjamin. Benjamin, I really appreciate your time with all of this. Folks, if you're watching this video, if you're watching this back at home, and you're wondering to yourself how else you can get involved with Longy, we have more Changemakers sessions coming up. We have other Changemaker sessions that we've already had that you can access the recordings for. And if you want to go really deep involved with Longy, you can also register for some of our classes. You can still start an application for our online Master of Music Ed, our online Certificate of Advanced Graduate Studies. And if you have any questions about any of that at all, ping me, which I know is another not an appropriate way to say this. Now I'm really going to be thinking about how I'm saying everything, Benjamin.
Oops.
But send me an email, and I'm happy to go ahead and meet with you and connect about that. Thank you so much, folks. I hope you're having a great rest of your day. I hope you're having a wonderful week. Take care. Bye-bye.